Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Calev Ben David. Each week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Bianca Zanetti. Bianca?
Thanks, Calev. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. A mob of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protesters rampage through the streets of Montreal during the NATO summit there, smashing storefronts, burning cars and clashing with police. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls the riot appalling and says acts of anti-Semitism, intimidation and violence must be condemned wherever we see them. And a poll by the French Jewish Council, CRIF, finds that 23% of France's population believe Jews are not like other French people, and 12% would be glad if Jews left France, indicating a sharp rise in anti-Semitic attitudes since October 7th. And in Texas, Jewish groups, together with teachers' unions and education advocacy groups, are criticizing a decision by the state government to promote a new faith and Bible-based learning curriculum in local grade schools, saying the program emphasizes specifically Christian material and values, such as referring to Jesus as the Messiah. And Jessica Tisch has been appointed Commissioner of the New York Police Department. Tisch is the second female and first Jewish woman to own the title of Commissioner of the largest police force in the U.S. She joined the New York Police Department as a counterterrorism analyst in 2008. Tisch's family is well known for its philanthropy and leadership roles in the American Jewish community. And Arthur Frommer, who launched a career of best-selling travel guidebooks with the publication of Europe on $5 a day in 1958, dies at 95. The son of Jewish immigrants from Poland and Austria, he credited their heritage and stress on education for inspiring his intellectual curiosity as a travel writer and editor. Those are your top 5 stories in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Calev.
Ever since the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords in 2020, establishing relations with Israel, there has been a flowering of sorts of Jewish life in the Gulf for both residents and visitors there. But the murder last week of Israeli Rabbi Tzvi Kogan, an emissary to Abu Dhabi's Chabad branch, has cast a dark and threatening shadow over that situation. Yulia Pobogolova has the story.
The United Arab Emirates, ranked one of the safest countries in the world in 2024, is now grappling with the shocking murder of Rabbi Tzvi Kogan. The rabbi, a dual Israeli-Moldovan citizen, went missing for days before his body was discovered by Emirati authorities. Kogan was an emissary to Abu Dhabi's Chabad chapter, arriving in the UAE following the normalization of ties between Israel and the Gulf nation in 2020. He also ran a kosher grocery store in Dubai. The UAE arrested 3 suspects in the murder on Sunday, later identifying them as nationals of Uzbekistan and pledging to uncover the details of the incident. But while their motives remain unclear, Israeli security sources suggest Kogan was being tracked by Iranian intelligence. Israel has condemned his murder as a, quote, despicable anti-Semitic act of terror and vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice.
I wish to express deep shock on my behalf, on behalf of all the cabinet members, on behalf of the citizens of Israel, and on behalf of the entire Jewish people, over the abduction and murder of Tzvi Kogan. Of blessed memory, may God avenge his blood. I greatly appreciate the cooperation with the United Arab Emirates in investigating this murder. We will strengthen our ties, particularly in the face of attempts by the axis of evil to harm our peaceful relations.
Kogan's death has also brought back painful memories for his family. He was related to Rabbi Gavriel Holtzberg, who was killed alongside his wife in the 2008 Mumbai Chabad house terror attack. The UAE confirmed on Saturday the rabbi had been missing since Thursday, but refrained from mentioning Kogan's Israeli citizenship, instead identifying him as Moldovan. The UAE has maintained its ties with Israel throughout the war against Hamas in Gaza and remains a key partner under the Abraham Accords. But Rabbi Kogan's murder reminds of the ongoing risks for Israelis and Jews living abroad, even in countries with normalized relations. In response to the killing, Israel has reiterated a Level 3 travel warning for the UAE, advising against non-essential travel.
And joining us now for more from New York is Rabbi Mark Schneier, the president of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. And Rabbi Schneier, you have been one of the most prominent Jewish figures, even before the Abraham Accords, certainly after, traveling in the Gulf in these countries, promoting relations between the UAE, Bahrain, other countries there, with Israel and the wider Jewish community. Is there now cause for concern for Jews there in the Emirates and elsewhere, either those who live there or those like yourself traveling there?
Well, first, let me tell you how saddened I am by this tragedy. Rabbi Kogan, back in 2022, assisted my rabbinic team in facilitating kosher food at the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, in Doha. So on a personal note, I need to express my own feelings of sadness on this unspeakable tragedy. Yes, there needs to be concern for the simple reason that the current conflict, the war between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, et cetera, this has evolved into a global conflict between Muslims and Jews. It's not limited just to the region. We find this in Europe. Look at what happened in Amsterdam just 2 weeks ago, in Germany, here in North America and Latin America. Throughout the world, there is a global conflict between 16 million Jews and 1.8 billion Muslims, and why we must be vigilant in terms of travel and visiting countries throughout the world today.
Now, what about specifically, though, in places like the Gulf, for example? And certainly one has to point out, as we pointed out in that report, the UAE and Bahrain have maintained their relations with Israel throughout this very difficult period. But at the same time, these are countries that have relations with Iran. These are countries that have relations with other countries, certainly with populations hostile to Israel. What about in those specific circumstances?
I think we need to pay attention closely to the reaction on the part of UAE officials to the murder of Rabbi Kogan. I mean, they were hell-bent on swift justice. They expressed their anger and their outrage. My distinguished friend, the UAE ambassador here in Washington, Ambassador Yusuf Al-Otaiba, was unequivocal in stating how this was an attack on the UAE, to quote him, on its values and on our vision. So they took this very personally. I must tell you that they responded in such a rapid time, probably more than any other European country. So on one hand, you're correct, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, these are Muslim and Muslim majority countries that have maintained their support for Israel, for the Jewish people, in the midst of this conflict. But I come back to my original point, the very sad reality that because of the war, we have seen an escalation, a heightening of tensions between Jews and Muslims worldwide. And why we need to find some resolution to this conflict. We cannot be in a continued state of 16 million Jews in conflict with 1.8 billion Muslims.
Well, certainly everyone wants a resolution to these conflicts, but until that happens, Rabbi Schneier, is there something the Israeli government could be doing more to help ensure the safety, security of Jews abroad and in those countries in the region? Is there something more the global Jewish leadership, Jewish groups should be doing to help out in this situation?
Well, I think two things. First, we need to remain vigilant. I know that these countries work closely with Israel, with the United States. But we also need to try and find a resolution. You know, I feel very, very strongly about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia really being the resolution to this conflict. People forget, Caleb, that Saudi Arabia is the spiritual center of Islam. It is the custodian of Mecca and Medina. I feel very strongly that if the spiritual center of Islam were to normalize relations with the Jewish state, how that message would resonate, would reverberate throughout the Islamic world, in the Middle East, in Europe, in North America, in Indonesia, throughout the world. And I think we need to acknowledge that there is a resolution to this conflict that can also lower the temperature between Muslims and Jews worldwide.
All right. Well, a good message to leave us with. Rabbi Mark Schneier, President, Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. Thank you for joining us on Jewish World
My pleasure. Thank you.
Last week, the U.S. House of Representatives approved a new bill that would grant the executive branch extensive power to sanction or shut nonprofit organizations it deems as supporting or encouraging terrorism. It's a measure you'd expect many Jewish organizations to support, given what's been happening on the streets of America since October 7th last. But some are opposed to the bill coming to law, arguing it goes too far in the direction of suppressing civil liberties. Well, first, let's hear one of the bill's supporters, Republican Representative Lloyd Smucker.
First, about the facts in this bill. Today's 411 days since Hamas terrorists capture and continue to hold men, women, and children, including 7 American citizens hostage in the Gaza Strip. And in the wake of those attacks, nefarious groups have leveraged their status as nonprofits under Section 501c3 of the tax code to provide material and financial support to Hamas.
Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in Washington, D.C. And Mike, this does seem like the kind of bill that should have broad Jewish support, but why are there several Jewish groups, organizations that are having problems with it?
Several dozen Jewish groups, mainly from the reform and conservative movements. And the problem revolves around due process, essentially. The way the anti-terror laws are constructed right now around 501c3s, these nonprofits, it goes through the courts, and there are remedies, and there are legal appeals and multiple layers of appeals. The new bill, should it pass the Senate and eventually be signed by the president, would limit that discretion essentially to the Treasury Secretary, and the only appeal would go through the Treasury Secretary. There really would be no remedy through the courts. And on top of that, really there's no obligation on the part of the Treasury Secretary to show all the evidence that's being used to ban or strip the tax-exempt status from those 501c3 organizations if that evidence conflicts with national security imperatives. And so therefore, it's not just Jewish groups because they're Jewish per se, but just groups in general. These nonprofits, universities, private foundations are coming out against this bill, fearing that it will be used for political purposes, this time possibly by a Republican administration coming in, but just as easily by a Democratic administration further down the line. It revolves more around the due process, I think, than discrimination against any particular religious entity. It is of note, though, that AIPAC backs this bill, so does the Orthodox Union, and the ADL backs it with the condition that it include down the line more provisions to allow for greater due process.
Now, it did pass the House. It's going to go to, at some point, say, to the Senate, which the Republicans are due to take control over, and perhaps to the White House, a bill perhaps that President Biden would not be comfortable with, but President-elect Trump, we can assume, would sign off, certainly, on some bill like this?
I think he would sign off on it, but the question now becomes, because this is going to carry over into the next Congress in January, the bill will have to pass the House again. Will it pass the House with more potential provisions for appeals, more potential provisions for being able to see all the evidence? I would presume there might be more Republicans who take a closer look at this bill and may say, hey, we're giving up too much power here, we're giving up too much to the executive branch, and maybe it should include some of those provisions that some are looking for. So this bill that just passed the House, it's going to die at the end of the month here, come the next Congress, and we'll revisit the issue in the coming year.
Right, revisit the issue, because we should say this is an issue that, for example, many Jewish groups have been arguing, which is that a lot of these not-for-profits either funded groups like Hamas abroad under the guise of charity, or have even funded some of the domestic unrest we've seen in the U.S.
And that's basically why the bill is being afforded right now in the manner in which it is. Republicans and many Democrats are on the same page in that these groups that are supporting terrorism, both in name and in funding and material support, need to have their tax-exempt status stripped. I think there's very little pushback on that from within Congress, the general idea of these organizations being stripped of their tax-exempt status. The question arises, what is the process and how should it be changed? It's already under law that these groups that are supporting terrorism should not have tax-exempt status. The question is the process by which that is reviewed. Right now it's done through the courts. Now we're going down a different avenue where it's at the sole discretion of the executive branch, and I think there'll be some discussion within the halls of Congress as to how to kind of balance those two branches out and make sure that there is due process allowed, not just for terror groups that are supporting these 501c3s that are supporting terror organizations, but looking at how universities, private foundations that are just out there doing their normal everyday business, but might be at the might come at odds with the Trump administration or future Democratic administration, how all of these organizations may be protected and have their rights protected down the line.
All right. Well, again, I do think this is something that the incoming Trump administration will be dealing with. Mike Wagenheim in Washington, D.C., thank you for that.
Imagine a world without a cure for polio. By the mid-20th century, the polio virus pandemic killed or paralyzed over 500,000 people every year. In 1954, a doctor from New York found a cure. Polio was nearly eradicated worldwide. Dr. Jonas Salk developed one of the first successful polio vaccines, a Jewish doctor. There has never been a more important time to see what unites us. See the good.
That is one of the clips produced for a new global anti-hate campaign called See the Good that looks to encourage tolerance and bridge differences through media content like what we just watched, short clips that highlight the contributions to humanity from people of various religions, races, and creeds. It's the brainchild of veteran advertising and marketing executive Anthony Walsh, collaborating with the Raoul Wallenberg Center. And while neither its subjects or its creators are exclusively Jewish, Jews are prominent in its creation, including contributing narrations by such celebrities as the actors Emmanuel Shikri and Michael Douglas, the musician David Draymond, and the dancer Montana Tucker. And joining us now in studio is Anthony Walsh, co-founder and chief creative officer of See the Good. And Anthony, thank you for joining us. First, tell us just about how this project got underway. What is the genesis of it?
Well, about a year ago, someone called me out of the blue and they said, hey, listen, you've been running the world's biggest brands as a creative leader for close to 25 years. And after successful campaigns for Nike and Google and Coca-Cola, clearly you have to be able to come up with an idea to slow down hate. So we conducted a global data study over 3 months to figure out what is it about these targeted approaches to hate that just don't work, and how can we actually use a broad-based approach to hate to start to slow down all hate. And so out of that was born of a campaign called See the Good. And See the Good starts to tell stories. So ultimately it's an emotionally resonant storytelling platform that tells the stories of people from marginalized cultures and visible ethnicities who have propelled humankind forward with such an order of magnitude that without them probably one of us wouldn't be here today. And more than likely, on top of that, they've distributed these innovations without the primary purpose of patent or profit, simply to make the world a better place. And after developing this campaign, we realized that if this is going to come to life in a way that doesn't feel like paid political advertising propaganda, we need voices of amplified, authentic narration to start to tell these stories. And so we reached out to some celebrities, and the first celebrity to join us was Michael Douglas. And Michael Douglas narrated one of our films, and since then we've had innumerable celebrities from all walks of life all over the world join us.
Right. Let me just ask you, as I said before, we just saw a clip on Jonas Salk, of course, but there are many others who are profiled here who are not Jewish. Obviously, this is a campaign that's going to have a special resonance for the Jewish community, considering what's happened over the past year, a little more than a year. But why the decision to make it a more general campaign?
Well, so going back to the data study, this targeted approach to hate, if you want to even consider anti-Semitism campaigns, the idiom of the echo chamber is truer now today more than ever. And, it's vital that this is a campaign for unity that starts to brings together people from marginalized cultures and visible ethnicities, certainly not just Jewish people, although we have been the canary in the coal mine historically for the rise of hate. The only way to reduce that hate is to reduce all hate simultaneously.
Right. And how did it go when you approached some of these well-known figures, like you mentioned, Michael Douglas or Emmanuel Shikri, fairly well-known actress?
So that's a good question. No one said no. I mean, one of the most important things about this campaign, which is the antithesis of almost every other campaign, we're not asking people to choose sides. There's no divisiveness to this campaign. And if you look at some of the celebrities who have spoken out since October 7th and those who have not, those who have faced a huge degree of backlash, and those who have not are afraid to for the same reason. But they're all looking for a way to raise their voice. 70% of people under the age of 30 see a minimum of 2 messages of hate online every single day. If collectively we can reduce that to even 1.9, we will have changed history.
Right, and let's just talk about your partnering with the Raoul Wallenberg Center. We should.
Yeah, so the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights is our non-for-profit partner, which means we're raising funds to execute this campaign, and all funds raised go to the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, proceeds of which go to them, and the rest goes towards executing this campaign.
All right, Anthony Walsh, the campaign is called See the Good, and that is something that particularly in a very divisive time in the world over, and especially, for example, in the United States now, is a message to be taken. We wish you all the success, and we thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly.
I challenge every organization, every corporation, every individual to get online, join us, become an ambassador, amplify our content, give me a call, because this isn't everybody in. This is a campaign for humanity, and we need it now more than ever. There's never been a more important time to see what unites us.
Okay, Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Thank you kindly.
The original tablets of the Ten Commandments given to Moses on Mount Sinai may or may have not actually existed, but now you can own, well, if you can afford it, the closest thing to that mythical ancient artifact, the oldest stone copy of the Ten Commandments that has ever been discovered here in the land of Israel. More in this report. It's the greatest archaeological treasure never found, if it ever really existed. The tablets of the Ten Commandments that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai and stored in the Ark of the Covenant, housed in Jerusalem's Holy Temple. Those tablets later disappear from history, although many theories abound regarding their fate. Some believe they were carried off by the Romans when they destroyed the temple and are still hidden away in the Vatican, or lie buried elsewhere, as depicted in Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. But if the fate of those Ten Commandments remains a mystery, the closest thing to them will soon be up for sale.
An ancient tablet buried in the ruins, only to be rediscovered by workers building a railroad a century ago. This is the oldest known carving of the Ten Commandments, a cornerstone of law and morality. Likely carved in the late Roman or Byzantine era.
The tablet was discovered in 1913 during construction work near the city of Yavne. And while this may be the oldest version of the Ten Commandments carved in stone ever found, it is not exactly the one that Jews follow today. Instead of the commandment, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain," it includes an instruction to pray at Mount Gerizim in the West Bank, the holy site of the Samaritans, a group that broke off from the ancient Israelites thousands of years ago to form their own faith inspired by the Bible, which is still observed by a small Samaritan community in Israel. The tablet was purchased by an American rabbi 20 years ago and will go on public display next week for the first time in years at Sotheby's New York headquarters until its sale on auction on December 18th. The tablet is expected to fetch upwards of $1 million, but may be a bargain at any price given the historical value of this archaeological relic.
This ancient stone embodies a founding text of Western civilization, traveling through 1,500 years, connecting us all to a shared history.
And that's our program. Thank you for joining us this week on Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News.